Hey, good morning, everybody. It is 11 a.m. on Friday. What is it, May 6th already?
I think it's the sixth. It's crazy.
Yeah, and welcome to another Facebook Live with your friends at the Citizens Utility Board of Illinois. We've got our coffees here. We've got our unprofessional T-shirts on today
Yes.
because we're gonna succumb to the inevitable and just spend the whole half hour talking about music. Uh, no, really, but we're going to try and make this work related because we've been talking for a few years now, probably about how many great kind of like energy themed songs there are out there. And we've done some social media around it, and we talk about it sometimes on these Facebook Lives. And we decided to see if we could pull off a whole half hour Facebook Live talking about our favorite energy themed songs. And so I believe, Dave, that you laid out, because you're the boss, this is your job, you laid out 3 rules
There are rules.
for this.
There are rules.
Yeah.
The first rule is you have to authentically like the song. And ideally, although not in every case, but ideally you also have a personal story or relationship to it. That's not the case for every song I'm going to pick today, but it's something that you really like or is meaningful for you. So that's rule number one. Rule number two is that you try to be as creative as you can, but kind of weave it into a narrative about our issues that we're dealing with. And rule number three, I can't remember actually what the rule is, but I think it's probably try to have fun with it, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, let's see where this goes, and hopefully we'll get into a good policy discussion, but using songs as the intro and starting point.
Well, for people like you and I don't think this is difficult. I think anybody who's ever been at any kind of party with me knows that I can turn any
Yes.
give me a word and I can turn it into a discourse or a monologue about a topic. So this wasn't hard. It was really kind of, for me, like I have a whole stack of records here because I couldn't pick just 3, and I figured I would just pick them on the fly.
You're just going to wing it. You're just going to wing it.
Yeah, I have like a bunch, and we'll see where the conversation goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so much to talk about. We'll see if we can even get through 6 songs in this short period of time, because I have songs that touch on almost everything that we do these days. So, but I thought maybe you could go first, Dave, because you kind of gave me a sneak peek into your song.
Yeah. I think I will start. And the first song that I chose is "Battery" by Metallica. And I remember going to hockey camp in like the summer of 1986 or 85. I can't remember exactly. And a kid there introduced me to Metallica's "Ride the Lightning." And I'm like, oh my God, this is like just amazing, right? I never heard anything like it. It kind of blew Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath and Judas Priest away as far as hardness goes, right? And so when Metallica Master of Puppets came out in March of 1986, I immediately went to North Village Mall. Grew up in South Bend, and if you grew up in South Bend, you probably went to North Village Mall. It's a crappy thing that no longer exists, but they had a record store there. I buy Master of Puppets. I immediately, it was a tape. I put it in the tape deck, and all of a sudden, I'm confronted with, classical guitar, this kind of pretty melody. I'm like, what's going on? And then it just builds to this crescendo, and it's this awesome thrash song. So, "Battery" from Metallica. Now, how am I going to turn "Battery" into an energy? It's pretty obvious, right? I mean, come on. Obviously, one of the defining features of our moment right now is the declining cost of batteries. You see that, I think, most prominently in electric vehicles. And electric vehicle sales are actually continuing to increase at an exponential rate. EVs last quarter were 10% of the total sales in Europe, 5% of the total sales in the United States. But this is essentially double from the year before, and we're seeing about 60% growth quarter over quarter. So the transportation electrification is going on. There's a lot of new models coming out that are really cool. We got the Rivian produced here in Illinois. You've got really cool cars from Hyundai and Kia and Ford and GM. So it's a very exciting time. And I think that that's certainly one of the biggest issues that we've been dealing with, making sure that our EV policy takes full advantage of the opportunities here, not just from a climate point of view, not just saving on transportation costs, but using it really fundamentally as a grid resource, because as we've long said, Sarah, you know, that if we have the right policies in place, that you can actually reduce costs for the electric system, even if for people who don't drive or own an EV, because of the flexibility that it has because of the batteries. And so, you know, that's the first song I chose. And of course, not only on EVs, but we're about ready to engage in a grid planning docket at the ICC that came out of CEJA, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. And a big part of that is going to be, how do we set the frame for incorporating storage into our electric grid?
So that's a question actually I have. To what extent are storage and batteries in this context kind of synonymous? Is there energy storage that isn't batteries?
There is energy storage that isn't batteries. I mean, for example, pumped hydro, where you basically just use gravity, and there's other kinds of like concrete blocks gravity storage. At the end of the day, you're just moving basically a potential power from one time to another. I do think that in the grand scheme of things, batteries are probably will likely be the most common form of storage. Right now, most of the batteries are lithium ion. That's what most cars are powered off of, for example. And we're seeing that on the electrical grid. But I think that the state of the art, we're going to need to do more to have longer duration storage. And we're certainly no technical experts on this, Sarah, but it does seem like flow batteries offer a really good opportunity potentially to have longer term storage. But it becomes a very important issue, because as we have more intermittent resources on the grid, which is, that means more renewables, which is a good thing. At some point, it's very, very important that you have storage incorporated, because that's a way to have dispatchable, essentially carbon-free power. So first song is Battery. Very cool, lots of cool issues involved in storage. But it's certainly, when we first started at CUB, I think the mantra was, you can't store electricity cost effectively. And that's why, you have to build out the grid physically to meet, the highest peak, essentially hour of usage of the year. And there's a lot of costs associated with that. So with the declining cost of storage, with more options, it really opens up a lot of possibilities.
I have another question. I know it's already 11:08, but
yeah,
this is my chance to corner Dave about some of these questions I've had for a while. Within the structure of Illinois' system, who do you think whose job will it be to do the storage, and who's going to have the incentives to kind of build the storage and connect the storage to our system? Is that something that the utilities can even do? I mean, it's not generation, but in a way, supplying energy, or is that something that third parties would do and then work?
So it's likely going to be, I think, almost certainly be a combination of both. Batteries do kind of blend into the distribution system, which is a utility function, but also can be used for other applications. Actually, Illinois right now has one of the largest battery fleet in the country. That's all third party. And this was actually a success story. Essentially, there's a product that energy markets have called spinning reserve. And basically, you have to keep the grid in balance, like basically every second. And so, or else if it gets too high or too low, there are problems, right? Ultimately, it can lead to cascading failures. Previously, in Illinois, that service was primarily served by coal plants or gas plants that would be spinning, just waiting to be called on and being paid in the event that they were needed to keep the grid in balance. Well, because of some rule changes at PJM, they set up an economic structure. That function is almost now entirely provided by batteries in Northern Illinois, which saves money. They're more efficient. They're cheaper. And so that was a good, kind of success story of the incorporating, new technology in a way that has benefits. But I mean, I think ultimately this is one of the things we're going to be dealing with in the grid planning docket is, whose responsibility is it to do storage? What are the proper incentives? And because you can use storage for multiple applications, multiple benefits, how do you essentially compensate that in a fair way for for everyone.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. It's kind of, we're on the forefront here, our little Midwestern state, you know? So I'll let's see, which song am I gonna, I gotta go with this one. It's kind of a change in topic.
Okay, that's good.
It's one of my favorite songs ever. This is from the Hanoi Rocks, Back to Mystery Cities record. And the song is called Tooting Beck Wreck. And Dave, if you're not familiar with the song,
I am not.
It is a great song. You should look it up. I dare you to listen to it without dancing around a little bit. Don't find it on Deezer, because the song in Deezer is mislabeled. I don't think it's on Deezer, but on YouTube it's the right song. And basically, Tooting Beck is a neighborhood in South London, and the song is inspired by a really crappy apartment they lived in there that was like rat infested and just gross. And this song makes me think about the issue of housing stock. It's an often overlooked problem when we're talking about all of these grand ideas about electrifying homes, electrifying heat, adding solar, all this stuff. How do you do that when you have a large amount of housing stock in our state that is old and leaky and needs significant repairs in order for any of these upgrades to be worthwhile? And so I wanted to kind of shine some light on that. I think you're on this too. You're on a listserv where like the past couple of days, people have been debating avidly about the costs of upgrading electrical systems to deal with electric stoves and electric heat pumps. But even beyond that, not just upgrading the electrical system, but making sure there aren't any holes in the roofs or in the windows and things like that. CEJA made quite a bit of progress in that it requires the utilities now to set aside some of their energy efficiency funds for health and safety upgrades to homes, because historically when building envelope professionals come out to, install like a high efficiency furnace or insulation or something like that in a home through one of these efficiency programs, they've had to drop it and not do the work because they've found some pre-existing conditions in the housing stock that mean that it's not cost effective to do that. So now they're going to have some resources at least to make those upgrades so that they can then do the efficiency work. And so I think this is if we're going to be pursuing in earnest an electric future for all of Illinois, this issue is going to be huge. So we need to.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and it shows how interconnected and cross sector these energy transitions are. Because at the end of the day, it touches on so many parts of the economy. And yeah, we have a lot of old buildings, a lot of old housing stock that needs to be improved. But how can we do that? And how can we make sure that the incentives are aligned properly? And are we sending any disincentives? That discussion that we were on, that you're talking about, is a fascinating one to me. Essentially, you've got initiatives. I don't want to say the state or the city, but basically, if you do any work at all to upgrade the electrical, like to have an EV or an electric heat pump, you have to make sure the entire house is kept up to code. And that can serve as it greatly increases the cost of doing that. And it can result in some some bad incentives where people don't have an incentive to do anything because it costs so much to get it up to code. And, maybe the code exists for a good reason. In most cases, it probably does. But it is something we need to take a hard look at, because as part of this energy transition, we're absolutely going to need to maximize energy efficiency and all these other things that you reference.
Yep. Building codes.
Building code, very exciting.
Newsflash to most of us, but in fact, essential, not just for energy efficiency, but for going electric, going renewable, all of that stuff, if you're talking about it at the residential level. So that's my first pick.
That's a good one. And plus Hanoi Rocks, man, that's a good band. And I always remember Razzle, poor Razzle, I don't know.
Hanoi Rocks is one of those bands that when I finally saw a picture of them, I was like so surprised. I was like, whoa,
they don't look like you think they'd look.
Yeah, full on band. Wow.
Okay, my second song my second song. This may be, who knows, is Take Hold of the Flame by Queensryche, and specifically the live version, live in Japan. And this is a song that I liked when I was younger, but it's recently come back to my attention because of this subgenre of YouTube videos where they'll have people react to songs they've never heard before. And there's a whole thing, vocal coach reacts. And this song, I swear, there's probably 30 vocal coaches around the world who've reacted to this, because if it's not the best rock vocal performance, it's certainly in the top 3. His Jeff Tate, the vocalist, absolutely astonishing. And it's a good song too. It's a song of hope. It's very optimistic. It's kind of like, seize the day kind of thing. And, here's my connection, Taking Hold of the Flame.
I'm waiting for that. Okay.
Yeah, here's the connection. I mean, and it's a little bit of a stretch perhaps, but I don't know. We need to take hold of the flame in our gas furnaces, and we needed to replace them over time with the flame that is at the center of the earth, and using geothermal power. This is something that we are very high on at CUB. And the main reason is, well, first of all, we do need to decarbonize the heating sector if we're going to meet our climate change goals. And the city of Chicago has appropriately ambitious climate change goals. And basically have to move away from fossil fuel heat, and geothermal heat can do that. But also we have, as you know, Sarah, we have a real heating affordability crisis right now in the city of Chicago that has put these issues to the forefront. Really, Chicago is going to be at the epicenter of this energy transition, because we have a situation where over 30% or about 30% of people's gas customers right now can't afford to pay their monthly gas bills. And that's only going to get worse over time. It really is. Our existing gas utility system in the city of Chicago is essentially insolvent from a socio-political point of view. And so how we triage and transition away from natural gas heat over time to a new form of heat, almost certainly using high efficiency electric heat pumps that can be tied to the ground in some cases, in case it's ground, geothermal heat pumps, or air source, where you're not tying it to the ground. But both work. There's been a lot of cool technological developments on that front. We've talked about this before, but this issue for certainly for our organization, but really for the city and the state and the country, I think is the next frontier of the energy transition, because this is what we need to do. There are some new, some very encouraging trends on being able to do it. But it's going to be very, very difficult and something that you can't do overnight, just given the nature of trying to replace one system, with another over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but when you think about how recent in human history, having gas service to people's homes or, electric service to people's homes is, this isn't the first time that we have undergone a major transition.
No, I think, in fact, that's a very, very good point. I mean, I could be a little bit wrong on this, but I think it was like maybe, just a generation, maybe 50 or 60 years ago, when coal was actually the big source of heat. And that was replaced by natural gas. Mm-hmm. And that did have carbon and health benefits. But now we need to continue that transition. And since we in Illinois are going to have a grid that is by 2045, 100% carbon free, we basically know what to do to decarbonize. We use electricity, and especially for residential heating. So it's a very important issue, and again, something that I think is going to occupy more and more of our time going forward.
Well, this is certainly going to enrich my enjoyment of Queensryche from here on.
Yes.
I am going to think of the geothermal now every time I
Yeah.
You're sensing a theme, actually, because I'm pretty sure my friend Kurt went to this show. Didn't Queensryche open for Metallica on tour sometime in the 90s?
They did, which is sort of, Queensryche is not really, they're kind of a prog band ultimately. And, I guess they're considered hard rock, but they're not exactly like I wouldn't call them a metal band, for example, although sometimes they got pigeonholed in that genre. But yes. So far there's a little bit of a theme. I'll try to mix it up a little bit, but
all right.
We'll see if that works though. Probably not, I do like a lot of different kinds of music. I'm not sure that's going to come across in this segment, but we'll see.
Okay, let's see. What am I going to play next? Oh, I've got so many good ones. Okay, but I'm going to go with. I really want to do this. Well, maybe we can do it next time. I'm going to go
Yes.
with Pharmacon. Fantastic noise artist. I don't know if you've ever seen her play, Dave.
I have not.
These are
I've listened to some though.
pretty
Yeah.
fun. Yeah. Harsh noise.
Yes.
Love it. It's the kind of show I want to go and just like lean against the wall so you can really feel it, not just hear it. And I
Sure.
remember when I saw him play, it was like some big show. Aaron Dillaway was there. I actually when I made an ass of myself, I went up to Aaron Dillaway and I was like, "You're the Picasso of noise."
He's trying to figure out if that's a compliment or not.
Right. Because actually, his noise is almost too pretty, in a way. I mean, it's almost too perfect. And that's kind of like, anyway. So, and he's like, "Well, thank you." Anyway, on this album, there is a song is the wrong word, track called Transmission. And I know that you really wanted to talk about transmission. And I think, again, when we are involved in kind of our little lives with our little bills and our little state, we've been kind of blissfully detached from some of the big transmission issues that we've been on the brink of for a while, which are really coming to a head like now. So I don't even know where to begin. I mean, there's issues with transmission in Northern Illinois. There's issues with transmission in Southern Illinois. And finally, this issue is starting to get some play in the public because it's starting to have a really big impact on what we pay for electricity.
Yeah, I mean, it's so transmission is absolutely essential to do what we need to do cost effectively for climate change, right? A lot of our best wind resources, for example, are in the middle of the country, and we have to find ways to ship that power east, for example, right? There's also a need for transmission north and south. You kind of made vague reference to this, but recently we've seen a large increase in capacity costs. Ultimately, but the power needed to keep the lights on when usage is at its greatest in the MISO or in downstate Illinois service territory. And one of the reasons for that is the lack of transmission between North MISO and South MISO. MISO is this grid that it goes as far north as Manitoba in Canada, and it goes down into Louisiana, Arkansas, parts of Texas. And if we had more transmission between the northern and southern parts of the MISO grid, we wouldn't have seen this price spike in the Midwest that we just had. Now, what makes transmission such a complicated issue is that I think everyone agrees that we need more of it, but it's hard to build. And also, who pays for it? It can be very, very complicated because a lot of times, the people who benefit from it don't necessarily pay arguably their fair share. And so there's all these cost allocation questions that make it very difficult to do. And from a consumer point of view, it's like we know we need transmission, but we want to make sure it's the right kind of transmission, and ultimately that it's going to lead to the most benefits. But
and we don't want it in our backyard either. That's another issue.
No, and that look, there's a lot of NIMBYism out there, and we basically stay out of those fights. We understand it, but the problem is, we do need to build stuff to meet our climate goals, and transmission has to be part of that solution. The FERC recently, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has taken some big strides on transmission policy, and I'm not sure if they finalized this, but there's talk of really a special kind of process from a kind of consumer point of view to kind of oversee this, to make sure that as transmission becomes a bigger part of the bill, that these investments are prudent and aimed at lowering bills overall, and not just simply building transmission that isn't going to serve consumers' best interests. So it's a big, important issue, and one, again, that we're heavily involved in.
So is that where the transmission issue can be resolved or most productively worked on? Is like at the FERC level or at the regional transmission organization level, or is there something that the states can do
Well, right now, I mean, we sort of have a hodgepodge. I mean, you're going to have all three. You know, you're have the federal government, the federal regulators, state regulators, and the RTOs heavily involved in this. But right now, they tend to often work at cross purposes, and there isn't as much regional collaboration as there needs to be, and that often results in transmission lines taking forever to build. And there are some, it's important, you know, some are basically rate based by utilities, which means essentially they get a guaranteed return on their bill, and it shows up as a transmission charge ultimately from your electric utility. But increasingly, there are proposals where their user pays, where essentially there's a couple projects. For example, the most recent one is a project called SOO Green. It would be like SOO Green, and it would be on the rail lines that already exist, and essentially be a direct current from, I believe, in Iowa straight into Illinois, and then into the PJM market. And that's a really exciting thing, because you're bringing more carbon-free power in that helps reduce prices. And the people paying for it would be essentially the generators of that wind power in Iowa, and the direct users of it, if there are any. And so there are really some encouraging trends out there, but you know, these projects tend to be, you know, often stalled, and that you get into a lot of public policy battles, and utilities don't like that one because they're not building it. There's just a need for much more, you know, collaboration and, you know, a coherent kind of national and regional strategy.
Yeah. SOO Green, I remember first hearing about that like 3 years ago or something, and I expect not much has happened since then.
Recently, they won a decision at FERC, but you know, hopefully that project will go forward. Like again, it's bringing in lots and lots of power to our area, and ultimately headed out east, and that will reduce market prices at the end of the day. And so lots to do on transmission, but again, like every issue that we're involved in, there's a lot of thorny particulars, right? And it's very complicated from both a policy point of view and a political point of view.
Yeah. Working it all out, especially when you have so many different interested parties who stand to make dough in different ways or lose dough in different ways. It's actually fixing the problem is going to be real hard.
Right. I mean, a lot of things go back to structural economic incentives, don't they? At the end of the day.
So it's 11:27. Do you want to do your last song?
I have one more song. One more song. I will go quicker this time. It is Nuclear Fusion by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I know we were talking about this yesterday, Sarah. Neither one of us, I think you dislike the name more than I do, King Gizzard. But yeah, it's kind of a weird name. But they're an amazing band out of Australia, and they're kind of hard to describe. They kind of, you know, they play lots of different styles of music, but they're really quite cool. And they have a song, Nuclear Fusion, that is well, it's in micro tuning, which is kind of cool. So not your normal tuning, not your standard kind of intervals. What does it sound like? You know, a lot of Indian music and Turkish music can be in microtones. That's my extent of music theory knowledge. So I will move on from that. But nuclear fusion, you know, look, there's been, I could talk about the technological breakthroughs, and is nuclear fusion going to be a reality in our lifetimes? I have no clue. It does seem as if, based on what I'm reading in the scientific community, that there actually have been some pretty big breakthroughs on that. And if nuclear fusion were to happen, that would be almost an unlimited source of carbon-free electricity or energy. That would be fantastic. I don't think we can count on it, though, and so that's not the reason that I mentioned it. Although it is, again, there's a lot of cool technological breakthroughs out there. But what is the sun but giant nuclear fusion? And I think Sarah, I think you know this stat, but every second of the day we're hit by, I believe, 10,000 times our total energy usage in sun power. Basically, just we're inundated with it, more than we could possibly use. And we've been starting to tap that more and more with solar power, and that has been encouraging. The costs of that have declined hugely. It is a foundation and a core part of CEJA to ramp up that development in Illinois even further. But the situation in downstate Illinois with the MISO power market and the price spikes we're going to be seeing down there in June, I think puts a finer point on it, because one of the things that we really need to do is, I think, accelerate large solar projects in central and southern Illinois. There's a lot of land, and there's a big need, because if we can just build 3,000 megawatts of solar, which is a lot, but it is doable, then that would significantly lower the prices that we're paying for capacity. And so I think that there's lots of potential there, but I suspect that policymakers and groups like ourselves, we need to do what we can to see if it's possible to accelerate solar development even further, because it
can't happen fast enough.
It can't happen. It really can't happen fast enough. And So, and unfortunately right now, people may have seen in the news that there is this trade dispute at the Commerce Commission in DC around someone has suggested that some tariffs are being violated by solar developers in other countries, and that has put a slowdown. I know the folks that we know in the solar development industry are really concerned about that. We're already starting to see projects, for example, right next door in Indiana, NIPSCO, the Northern Indiana Power Company, has delayed retiring coal plants that they had scheduled to replace with solar because they can't get enough panels because of this, or they're worried about it because of this trade dispute. So we hope that issue is resolved very, very quickly. And we're certainly going to be doing everything we can to try to expedite solar development in central and southern Illinois, because that can go a long way to dealing with these capacity issues in the Ameren service territory.
I do have one piece of good solar news for Chicago area residents. We are on the verge of selecting a solar installer for the latest iteration of our Grow Solar group buy program, which CUB helped spearhead alongside the Midwest Renewable Energy Association for a couple of years, I think 2019 and 2022. Then, of course, the pandemic happened.
Yeah.
Also, state funding for solar renewable energy certificates dried up. And so there was a little pause on solar in Illinois until we got CEJA passed. But now CEJA's passed. Now things are opening back up. So we are embarking on another.
This is breaking news.
Yeah, Chicago region solar group buy. So if stay tuned.
And those are proven, those were very popular when we were involved in that before. And this is a great, essentially you're putting your purchasing power together and you can negotiate for very favorable terms. So that's cool.
Yeah, so it's a really good role for CUB as a consumer advocate, trying to get the best deals for folks. And so folks should stay tuned. It's not official yet. The selection is not official, but I believe they voted yesterday on an installer to go with. So we haven't signed any paperwork with them yet, but it's looking pretty good to be able to pull it off, despite some of these equipment.
Supply chain.
Problems. So so much to do, so much to talk about. I didn't even get to the rest of my stack, but we'll do this again or have it as a feature on.
Well, I'm sure this is the first time we did it. I think it was a success. We'll see. I'm sure it could very well go viral, right? Because come on, right? Who wants to hear? Everyone wants to hear us talk about like music and energy at the same time, right? This is like,
it's a no-brainer.
It's totally a no-brainer.
Literally.
Oh, my Rush 40th anniversary special collector's t-shirt with multiple moving pictures.
Is that beer? Is that a
well, it's a picture, right? There's like really bad puns. There's like a picture on a skateboard with a baseball, and there's a moving pictures. You get it?
Oh, Rush. You know what, dude?
Their
shirt is cooler than your Rush shirt. All right. I don't know if folks remember. The old
Fans wanted.
Yeah, they had the Mutiny was the place on Western where you and I could decide today that we wanted to form a band, and then we could get booked.
I've never been to the Mutiny, but I have heard. Yeah.
Oh, you never went?
No, never went.
That's a tragedy. Now you never can. Sorry to hear that, Dave. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Well, so long. Bye.
Happy Mother's Day.